great to see everyone that's tuning in, whether you're live right now or you're tuning in after the fact. I'm Brandon. It's great to see you guys again. Also, Brandon right behind here. This is Brandon Ludke. For those of you who kind of got introduced to him last week, he did a presentation on one of the chapters, one or two of the chapters, right? I can't remember. One of the chapters. Yeah, one of the chapters before we had to head off and go and had a fantastic time listening to Dr. Do you remember the name?
It was like
Turek, Dr. Turek, yes, on campus, author of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It really was a fantastic experience. Really was truly a wonderful time together and very long, 2.5 hours. Sometimes I wonder if we're going too long on these, and then I attend events like that, and I'm like, we're good. But grateful for your attendance and presence back again with us. If you're just tuning back in, one of the things I wanted to mention is just my apologies on, it seems we've been a little bit slower these last couple of weeks. Life has happened, midterms have happened, things have happened that have just come up and gotten in the way of some of the consistency we had early on. But tonight I'm excited to be jumping right back in. Ludke's here with me, and so he is actually going to be taking on our first chapter tonight. I guess it was almost 2 months ago, I asked him, hey, would you mind jumping in one of these weeks, just spending some time with me, setting out, doing these, and that's what he's done. And so I want to give him not just the opportunity, but also thank him for taking the time to prepare for these things. It's not easy. I don't say that because I do it all the time, and hey, look, it's not easy. You guys should understand this. I say this because Ludke's got a full-time job. I do this for a living full-time in a lot of ways, but he works full-time, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself when he gets back up here. And he does things I can't comprehend, nor would you want me ever doing. Not that I don't think I could learn at least some of it, but there is some minds that are different than mine when it comes to especially what I would call electrical engineering and things of that nature. You don't want me fixing that type of stuff, especially at a hospital, which is where he works. But I'm grateful for your presence tonight. We've got some fantastic chapters we're going to cover on charity, faith, and hope. Very excited to dive into that. So without further ado, we're going to switch over here real quick. He's going to take the first chapter. I'm going to take the next two chapters. These chapters are a little bit shorter in general, but before I do that, I almost forgot. I want to ask for your prayers. This weekend, I'm heading to Virginia to spend time with, I jokingly refer to them as the Hokies for Christ. It's Virginia Tech's, their college students life group there with the incredible Dean Meadows and the Blacksburg Church of Christ. Excited to be with them this weekend. And so I'll be traveling. Hopefully it's a wonderful time there. So if you won't mind keeping them in your prayers, and also myself as I'm traveling back and forth. And also if you're in that area, come on out and visit the church there. I know they would love to have you. It would be a fantastic time for all, just getting together with everyone. So with that in mind, let's dive in. So I'm going to turn this over here to Ludke, pull up the slides, and we'll get going from there.
All right. Let's get to it. Sorry in advance, my voice is gone just a little bit, so if I'm a little raspy, that would be why. He was right, yes, I do work at a hospital. I work in Grove City. They have a little engineering system in most hospitals where you can send equipment that doesn't work down, or if they need to make sure the equipment is continually working, we do preventative maintenance on everything. And so today I was recently up in surgery making sure that things were good, and so far everything today was good as it should be. So that was quite a good day. But I'm glad for all my colleagues there to help make sure that anything that I haven't learned yet, they're helping teach me. And hopefully I'll learn more as time goes on. But anyways, yes, welcome. And tonight I will be in charge of Mere Christianity, Book 3, Chapter 9. This book would be about charity, and C.S. Lewis begins as he always does, very promptly, talking about his previous chapters. He says in earlier chapters that there were 4 cardinal virtues and 3 theological virtues. The 3 theological ones are faith, hope, and charity. First, as to the meaning of the word, charity now means simply what used to be called alms, that is, giving to the poor. Originally, it had a much wider meaning. You can see how it got the modern sense. If a man has charity, giving to the poor is one of the most obvious things he does. So people came to talk as if that were the whole of charity. Sorry. In the same way, rhyme is the most obvious thing about poetry, and so people come to mean by poetry simply rhyme and nothing more. Charity means love in the Christian sense, but love in the Christian sense does not mean an emotion. It is a state not of the feeling, but of the will. That state of will which we have naturally about ourselves and must learn to have about other people. And when I think about this, as he goes on, I like to think about all the characters that we see in movies and TV shows that are focused on will and willpower. Like a Green Lantern, he powers his ring by the will that he has, and that's the choice of what he must do to accomplish his mission. So we must show Christian love towards others to accomplish the mission of bringing them to Christ, as how I see it. Lewis continues, a natural liking or affection for people makes it easier to be charitable towards them. It is therefore normally a duty to encourage our affections, to like people as much as we can, just as it is often our duty to encourage our liking for exercise or wholesome food. But this liking itself, not because this liking is itself the virtue of charity, but because it is a help to it. So we have to try to become more positive towards people, which can be hard, especially since there's so much negativity in the world that we see around us. But the Bible calls us to try to be better than what we currently are. Lewis continues, but though natural liking should normally be encouraged, it would be quite wrong to think that the way to become charitable is to sit in trying to manufacture affectionate feelings. Some people are cold by temperament. That may be a misfortune for them, but is no more a sin than having bad digestion is a sin, and does not cut them out from the chance or excuse them from the duty of learning charity. Now, sometimes I encounter people that are just cold, or what you might say have a face that is frowning all the time, but you must understand that even when you're feeling bad, or if they're feeling bad, or not just in a constant mood of happiness, that we all need to learn to be ready to be able to encourage people as best we can, and to try to just be there for people. Like a lot of times I've heard around that listening to people is something that people just need to hear sometimes, and I'm all for making sure that we can make sure people understand that they're heard, so that we can make sure that they know that we care, and they know that someone cares about them, because a lot of people don't have someone that cares about them. And that's just something that we all need to improve on, is to make sure that we all know that we can be lights for other people, as Jesus said in the Gospels. Lewis continues on, the rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking him more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less. Now, this is something that I enjoy trying to go through every day. They say, fake it till you make it. And, well, I feel like this is kind of what he's saying a little bit, is that you got to practice being charitable, because you might not be actually charitable yet, but to continue to act on the possibility that you could have been charitable to this person, and practice that, then you'll find yourself having practiced that, and the better you are at it in the future. And maybe even it may come super easily to you in the future, and you might not even think about it. He says, consequently, Though Christian charity sounds very cold thing to people whose heads are full of sentimentality, and though it is quite distinct from affection, yet it leads to affection, the difference between a Christian and a worldly man is not that the worldly man has only affections or likings, and the Christian only has charity. The worldly man treats certain people kindly because he likes them. The Christian, trying to treat everyone kindly, finds himself liking more and more people as he goes on, including the people he could not even imagine himself liking at the beginning. And this is where we find ourselves practicing, even the people that give us trouble at work, or just you hear rumors about. You might want to try to reach out and try and give a good smile to them, do some care about their day, and maybe that might spur a change in them. Is God plant these seeds, as the parables say, and make sure that you try your best at being a good person for everyone to see. He says, this same spiritual law works terribly in the opposite directions. The Germans, perhaps, at first ill-treated the Jews because they hated them. Afterwards, they hated them much more because they had ill-treated them. The more cruel you are, the more you will hate. And the more you hate, the more cruel you will become. And so on in a vicious cycle forever. And this is easy to see in the world today sometimes, because people just get so downtrodden and then they just need help. But they get stuck in this loop where they can't escape. Jesus offers that escape, and he offers us to try to break that cycle and be more positive in loving towards all the people around us. Good and evil both increase at compound interest. That is why the little decisions you and I make every day are of such infinite importance. The smallest good act today is a capture of a strategic point from which a few months later you may be able to go on to victories you never dreamed of. An apparently trivial indulgence in lust or anger today is the loss of a ridge or a railway line or a bridgehead from which the enemy may launch an attack otherwise impossible. I remember when I was younger, we used to read a book called Enemy Pie. It was an interesting book because it's like there's this kid, he has a bully, he goes to school and he's like, all right, I'm going to get this kid back, but how can I do it? Somebody suggests enemy pie. And he's like, well, sounds like the best thing I could do for a person, something for my enemies. But no, it was just a pie. It was something that he could try and be loving and caring towards his friend, to show that there was something that cared about the other person, and then eventually that led to a friendship down the line, and hopefully that was a healthier friendship, but that's besides the point. In the kid's book, it worked out. Some writers use the word charity to describe not only Christian love between human beings, but also God's love for man and man's love for God. About the second of these two, people are often worried. They are often told they ought to love God. They cannot find any such feelings in themselves. What are they to do? The answer is the same as before. Act as if you did. Do not sit trying to manufacture feelings. Ask yourself, if I were sure that I loved God, what would I do? When you have found the answer, go and do it. So this is just continuing on for his point to, it's like people will say they're looking for that feeling when they go to church. And it's more of a choice than a feeling that you're supposed to be looking for, because God isn't asking for you to feel anything specific. He's asking you to choose him, and for us to continue in following him and obeying his word. That's a choice more than a feeling. So I believe this also makes sense to me. On the whole, God's love for us is a much safer subject to think about than our love for him. Nobody can always have devout feelings, and even if we could, feelings are not what God principally cares about. Christian love, either towards God or towards man, is an affair of the will. If we are trying to do his will, we are obeying his commandment. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God. He will give us the feelings of love if he pleases. But the greater thing to remember is that, though our feelings come and go, His love for us does not. It is not wearied by our sins or our indifference, and therefore it is quite relentless in its determination that we shall try and be cured of those sins, at whatever cost to us, at whatever cost to Him. And so I'd like to point out that, yes, God is wonderful. That's why we worship Him. If he wasn't wonderful, then, well, that would be terrible. But so God here, we see Lewis point out that God loves us, and that won't change. He always wants us to come back to Him. And the charity of God's love for us is something that we should strive for continually, to try and understand and reciprocate in love towards Him. And thank you for listening. We'll be turning this back to Brandon for the next chapter, and have a good evening.
All right. Thank you, Ledke. Appreciate that greatly. One of the neatest things that I've always found, especially about that chapter right there, is the very premise of love as a choice, especially in light of how often we in our culture have made love out to be emotional. It's emotion-driven. Everything is about the emotion as opposed to the consistent choice. In fact, this carries over into the New Testament quite a bit. And the main way that it carries over is actually when Jesus says, how will they know that you are my disciples? Well, they'll know by your love. Well, how will they know that? He said, if you love me, you will obey my commands. You will do the things that I said to do. And that's a key component, is the actual action is what is the love. It's not just the emotion. In fact, it's rarely referenced as the emotion. It's almost always referenced as the action itself. And so with that in mind, when the most famous verse probably in Scripture, at least in our culture, which really comes down to, for God so loved the world that He gave, that there was an action that took place. It wasn't merely just this emotion that is tied into all of it. So I always find that fascinating, especially when you look at that chapter on this very clear distinction that Lewis is making that we don't make in our culture. We talk about love only from the emotional perspective, as if those feelings were what love was, as opposed to it being something completely different, that it is the action. And Lewis does a fantastic job describing that. So let's get on to a little bit deeper, which is where we go into the idea of hope. Hope is one of the theological virtues. This means that a continual looking forward to the eternal world is not, as some modern people think, a form of escapism or wishful thinking, but one of the things a Christian is meant to do. It does not mean that we are to leave the present world as it is. So this is actually something I've heard quite a bit from people historically, is this idea that Christians are always thinking about the next world. And I actually look at ours, and I don't think we do hardly at all, especially in light of what a lot of people deal with in this world. There have been moments, I think, when we face life or death situations in our lives where we have moments of introspection where we might think about eternity. But in general, we are a culture that celebrates youth. It celebrates life. It celebrates the idea of constant growth and personalization and so forth, but very, very much bound in our time, bound in where we are in this time. It's who you are in this world, not necessarily on eternity. And Lewis is going to get into that. In fact, he said, if you read history, you'll find that the Christians who did most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. The apostles themselves, who set on foot the conversion of the Roman Empire, the great men who built in the Middle Ages, the English evangelicals who abolished the slave trade, all left their mark on earth precisely because their minds were occupied with heaven. That their focus was, this life does not matter more than the next one, more than eternity in heaven. And so with that in mind, that's what they focused on. So all of their conversations and all of their times around a table was spent on trying to convince people about what was yet to come. And that's, in fact, the grand irony, is how they ended up changing the world, because they were so set on the next life being more important than just this one here. It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this. I totally agree with that. And then one of his more famous quotes of all of his books is this one right here, and I love this one. Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither. You see, it seems a strange rule, but something like it can be seen at work in other matters. When you aim at heaven, you will get earth thrown in. When you focus on the things that really matter in eternity, then it seems that life, it's not that it goes better, is it that it has a deeper meaning, a deeper purpose. And so even if your life is cut short tragically, it does not change the purpose that you lived with it because you were focused on something beyond just the here and now. Most of us find it very difficult to want heaven at all, and this I think is very true, except insofar as heaven means meeting again our friends who have died. This is where I was kind of referencing earlier, this idea of we just kind of get focused on, the idea that people will see them again. We have a life or death situation. One day we'll see them again, and so this is kind of what we fall into. One reason for this difficulty is that we have not been trained. Our whole education tends to fix our minds on this world. I really do believe that is the case, especially now. All of our education, all the things that we do, we have relegated even the premise of theological education, philosophical education, even art and literature and so forth, which tended to push the mind above the things of this world. Having conversations about beauty and art and literature and philosophy and the soul and the mind have been relegated at times to a very sterile, almost clean environment in education where everything is about the here and now, the materialistic world. And it's cost us a lot. I do believe it's cost us from a soul perspective as a culture that we don't focus on the things that ultimately matter in real life. Another reason is that when the real want for heaven is present in us, we do not recognize it. Most people, if they had never have really learned to look at into their own hearts, would know that they do want and want acutely something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world that offer to give it to you, but they never quite keep their promise. Not only do I think this is true, this is actually one of those underlying statements that I think is powerful for us to spend time talking about and thinking about, that there is something that cannot be fulfilled in us in this world, and we all feel this consistently. The longings which arise in us when we first fall in love, or first think of some foreign country, or first take up some subject that excites us, are longings which no marriage, no travel, no learning can really satisfy. I am not now speaking of what would be ordinarily called unsuccessful marriages or holidays or learned careers. I'm speaking of the best possible ones. There was something we grasped at in the first moment of longing which just fades away in the reality. I think everyone knows what I mean. The wife may be a good wife, and the hotels and scenery have been excellent, and chemistry might be an interesting job, but something has evaded us. Things of this world fade when what we're longing is for something eternal. Now, there are two wrong ways of dealing with this fact and one right one. The fool's way, which obviously you should tell instantly from this is one of the wrong ones. He puts the blame on the things themselves. He goes on all of his life thinking that if only he tried another woman or went for a merely expensive holiday or whatever it is, then this time he really would catch the mysterious something we're all after. Most of the bored, discontented, rich people in this world are this type. They spend their whole lives trotting from woman to woman through the divorce courts, from continent to continent, from hobby to hobby, always thinking that the latest is the real thing at last, and always disappointed. If there was ever just a really quick synopsis of our current culture in and of itself, this would be it. The second way is the way of the disillusioned, sensible man. He soon decides that the whole thing was moonshine. Of course, he says, one feels like this when one's young, but by the time you get my age, you've given up chasing the rainbow's end. And so he settles down and learns not to expect too much and represses the part of himself which used, as he would say, to cry for the moon. This is, of course, a much better way than the first and makes a man much happier, at least, and less of a nuisance to society. I do love that he always throws that in there. It tends to make him a prig, and this is kind of like a jerk. He is apt to be rather superior towards what he calls adolescence. I think we've all met people like this at some point in time. But on the whole, he rubs along fairly comfortably. It would be the best line we could take if man did not live forever. But supposing infinite happiness really is there waiting for us, supposing one really can reach the rainbow's end, in that case, it would be a pity to find out too late, a moment after death, that by one's supposed common sense we had stifled in ourselves the faculty of enjoying it. And I love this because this leads to the Christian way. The Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger, well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire, well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself, and this is one of those quotes that I think you probably heard quoted before by Lewis, if I find in myself a desire with no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation that is that I was made for another world. And in fact, I talk about this a lot with the college students. They've heard me say this before, that we often are a Genesis 2 people living in a Genesis 3 world. That there is an aspect of our soul, our eternal nature, that wants to return to the way things was, which was where we walked in the coolness of the garden with God, where we knew him, where we spent time with him, and there was peace and there was glory, and there was to walk in the presence of God was just something fantastic. And so there is this call to return in essence. And so this desire that we have, because we are made eternal in our nature like God, that he wants us, and we are feel a calling to return to that. So we are a Genesis 3 people, though, longing for a Genesis 2 world. And so we feel the brokenness, and we can't really grasp the explanation yet. We can't grasp what it is that we really are longing, especially when we don't know and realize that it's God himself. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for the something else of which they are only a kind of copy, or echo, or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and to help others do the same. We would often reference this as evangelism. Keep going. There is no need to be worried by facetious people who try to make the Christian hope of heaven ridiculous by saying they do not want to spend eternity playing harps. Now, this next line is probably one of my favorite ones that Lewis does, just for the little snarkiness. He says, the answer to such people is that if they cannot understand books written for grown-ups, they should not talk about them. I'll just be honest. I would love to throw this out there at people. I don't think I have the standing in life that Lewis did to be able to write such things, but I understand it. I feel what he's saying here. Basically, if you're not going to take this seriously, if you've really read the Bible and you've only walked away with this idea that heaven is just people playing harps, you're missing the whole thing. Maybe you should just not talk. And so from there, he also notes, all the scriptural imagery, harps, crowns, gold, etc., is of course a merely symbolical attempt to express the inexpressible. Musical instruments are mentioned because for many people, not all, music is the thing known in the present life which most strongly suggests ecstasy and infinity. Crowns are mentioned to suggest the fact that those who are united with God in eternity share his splendor and power and joy. Gold is mentioned to suggest the timelessness of heaven. Gold does not rust, and the preciousness of it. People who take these symbols literally might as well think that when Christ told us to be like doves, he meant that we were to lay eggs. Now, can I just shout, I love that little lie in there. He's just talking about the symbolism of Scripture and of heaven. So do I believe that heaven will look exactly the way that we have in earthly terms? I don't know. I would be fine if it were, but I also understand if it weren't, because there are things that seem to be allegorical, things that seem to be symbolic. And so for this idea of just playing harps for the rest and in all of eternity, I think we're missing the ultimate point of what God is trying to say to us, and that's what Lewis is getting at. So from there, we're going to dive into this last chapter. I love this last little chapter here in this section. It's fantastic. I must talk in this chapter about what Christians call faith. Roughly speaking, the word faith seems to be used by Christians in two senses or on two levels, and I will take them in turn. In the first sense, it means simply belief, accepting or regarding as true the doctrines of Christianity. That is fairly simple, but what does puzzle people, at least it used to puzzle me, is the fact that Christians regard faith in this sense as a virtue. And this is an interesting notion. I used to ask how on earth it can be a virtue. What is there moral and immoral about believing or not believing a set of statements? Obviously, I used to say a sane man accepts or rejects any statement, not because he wants to or does not want to, but because the evidence seems to him good or bad. If he were mistaken about the goodness or badness of the evidence, that would not mean he was a bad man, but only that he was not very clever. And if he thought the evidence bad, but tried to force himself to believe in spite of it, that would be merely stupid. Well, I think I still take that view, but what I did not see then, and a good many people do not see still, was this. I was assuming that if the human mind once accepts a thing as true, it will automatically go on regarding it as true, until some reason for considering it turns up. In fact, I was assuming that the human mind is completely ruled by reason, but that is not so. And let me tell you, this is definitely not so. We live in a culture where reason is not the point. In fact, reason is actually something that we set aside on most things. We are driven by emotion, driven by feeling, how we feel about things. In fact, that is one of the ultimate things that seems to be in our education system is how does this make you feel? How do you feel about this? As opposed to it being the real thing. Is this logical? Is this true? The truth is a relative in a socially immoral society. In fact, you have your truth, I have my truth, and so truth is not the standard. Instead, it's how you feel, and how you feel is valued as your truth, even though it has nothing to do with truth itself. For example, my reason is perfectly convinced by good evidence that anesthetics do not smother me and that properly trained surgeons do not start operating until I am unconscious. Now, I have to say, I agree with him. This is typically my understanding of anesthetics. But that does not alter the fact that when they have me down on the table and clap their horrible mask over my face, a mere childish panic begins inside me. I start thinking I'm going to choke, and I'm afraid they will start cutting me up before I am properly under. In other words, I lose my faith in anesthetics. It is not reason that is taking away my faith. On the contrary, my faith is based on reason. It is my imagination and my emotions. The battle is between faith and reason on one side and emotion and imagination on the other. A man knows on perfectly good evidence that a pretty girl of his acquaintance is a liar and cannot keep a secret and ought not be trusted. But when he finds himself with her, his mind loses its faith in the bit of knowledge and he starts thinking, perhaps she'll be different this time. And once more makes a fool of himself and tells her something he ought not to have told her. His senses and emotions have destroyed his faith in what he really knows to be true. And let me tell you, this is a fascinating one for me when I think about this, because having been in youth ministry for 15 years, I share the story all the time about a weekend away with middle schoolers will change you on the notion of reason very quickly. It will also have you questioning your sanity on whether or not somebody's emotions or feelings should ever drive decisions. Because I remember specifically one weekend, two kids, I was kind of having to look at them like, hey, guys, keep your hands to yourself. They were always holding hands everywhere. And I remember her turning and looking at him going, I just love him so much. And they were like 13 years old. And then on Sunday, that was Friday, on Sunday on the way back, they were sitting in two different vans. And one was would not talk to the other. And she's the most horrible person. He's the worst person in the world and so forth. And all within a space of 2 days, everything had changed, all based off of their emotion. Very little about actual reason. Or take a boy learning to swim. His reason knows perfectly well that an unsupported human body will not necessarily sink in water. He has seen dozens of people float and swim. But the whole question is whether he will be able to go on believing this when the instructor takes away his hand and leaves him unsupported in the water, or whether he will suddenly cease to believe it and get in a fright and go down. Now, just the same thing happens about Christianity. I'm not asking anyone to accept Christianity if his best reasoning tells him that the weight of the evidence is against it. That is not the point at which faith comes in. But supposing a man's reason once decides that the weight of the evidence is for it. There will come a moment when there is bad news, or he is in trouble, or is living among a lot of other people who do not believe it, and all at once his emotions will rise up and carry out a sort of blitz on his belief. Or else there will come a moment where he wants a woman, or wants to tell a lie, or feels very pleased with himself, or sees a chance of making a little money in some way that is not perfectly fair, some moment, in fact, at which it would be very convenient if Christianity were not true. And once again, his wishes and desires will carry out a blitz. I am not talking of moments at which any real new reasons against Christianity turn up. Those have to be faced, and that is a different matter. I'm talking about moments when a very mere mood rises up against it. And can I be honest with you, this is actually one that I think all of us feel, understand. We may have not thought about it because we often think these are moments of weakness and the rest, instead of realizing that our emotions and our imagination is at war with our reason and that which we know and that which we hold to be true. And putting it in these words helps us kind of facilitate it in our own minds what it is that he's getting at. Now, faith, in the sense in which I'm here using the word, is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted in spite of your changing moods. For moods will change, whatever view your reason takes. I know that by experience. Now that I am a Christian, I do have moods in which the whole thing looks very improbable. But when I was an atheist, I had moods in which Christianity looked terribly probable. This rebellion of your moods against your real self is going to come anyway. That is why faith is such a necessary virtue. Unless you teach your moods where they get off, you can never be either a sound Christian or even a sound atheist, but just a creature dithering to and fro, with its beliefs really dependent on the weather or the state of its digestion. Consequently, one must train the habit of faith. Now, I love this analogy, especially when you're teach your moods where to get off, because he's not making a claim just from Christianity. He's also saying, look, even atheists has to get a point where if you're just going about by whatever you're feeling in the moment, you are no better than any animal. You're no better than anything. Now, there will be some atheists out there who would actually argue, we are. That's all we are. We're just animals and the rest. And then I think Lewis would turn around and go, well, then what's the point of that? There's no point. You're no better than anybody else. In fact, that's actually a terrible, even worse premise on how to view life. So he goes from that, and I love this, consequently one must train the habit of faith. The first step in training your faith is to recognize the fact that your moods change. The next is to make sure that if you have once accepted Christianity, then some of its main doctrines shall be deliberately held before your mind for some time every day. That is why daily prayers and religious readings and church goings are a necessary part of the Christian life. You need to train yourself in these things. We have to be continually reminded of what we believe. Neither this belief nor any other will automatically remain alive in the mind. It must be fed. And as a matter of fact, if you examined 100 people who had lost their faith in Christianity, I wonder how many of them would turn out to have been reasoned out of it by honest argument. Do not most people simply drift away? Now I must turn to faith in the second or higher sense, and this is the most difficult thing I have tackled yet. I want to approach it by going back to the subject of humility. You may remember I said that the first step towards humility was to realize that one is proud. I want to add now that the next step is to make some serious attempts to practice the Christian virtues. A week is not enough. Things often go swimmingly for the first week of something new. Try 6 weeks. And I love that he throws it out there. He's like, look, it's easy just to do something for a week. And many of us know today that it's usually about 3 weeks, creates a pattern, creates kind of a habit and so forth. I believe it actually takes a little bit longer than that, but 3 weeks gets you into the habit of things. He says, try 6 weeks. Try Christianity for 6 weeks and train it and feed it consistently every day. By that time, having, as far as one can see, fallen back completely or even fallen lower than the point one began from, one will have discovered some truths about oneself. No man knows how bad he is till he has tried very hard to be good. A silly idea is current that some good people do not know what temptation means. That is an obvious lie. Only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is. And this, I can tell you, from personal experience, is actually something that drives at me pretty consistently, because it feels like the harder we sometimes try to resist the temptation, the stronger it feels. And that's true. And not only is it true, I think it's purposeful. And it's because we are coming up against temptation, coming against our own reason and emotion, and that it's those of us who truly understand what it means to deny ourselves the things that God has told us, don't do this or don't be that way. That's where we really understand it even more, what it means to truly die to yourself. After all, you find out the strength of the German army by fighting against it, not by giving in. You find out the strength of a wind by trying to walk against it, not by lying down. A man who gives in to temptation after 5 minutes simply does not know what it would have been like an hour later. That is why bad people, in one sense, know very little about badness. They have lived a sheltered life by always giving in. We never find out the strength of the evil impulse inside us until we try to fight it. And Christ, because he was the only one who never yielded to temptation, it is only the only man who knows to the full what temptation means, the only complete realist. Very well then, the main thing we learn from a serious attempt to practice the Christian virtues is that we fail. If there was any idea that God has set up a sort of exam and that we might get good marks by deserving them, that has to be wiped out. If there was any idea of a sort of bargain, any idea that we could perform our side of the contract and thus put God in our debt, so that that if it was up to him and mere justice to perform, my slide is to perform his side, that has to be wiped out. I think everyone who has some vague belief in God until he becomes a Christian has the idea of an exam or of a bargain in his mind. The first real result of real Christianity is to blow this idea to bits. When they find it blown to bits, some people think this means that Christianity is a failure and give up. They seem to imagine that God is very simple-minded. In fact, of course, he knows all about this. One of the very things Christianity was designed to do was to blow this idea to bits. God has been waiting for the moment at which you discover that there is no question or earning a pass mark in this exam or putting him in your debt. And here's where it comes to a beautiful conclusion. Then comes another discovery. Every faculty you have, your power of thinking or of moving your limbs from moment to moment, is given you by God. If you devoted every moment of your whole life exclusively to his service, you could not give him anything that was not, in a sense, his own already. So that when we talk of a man doing anything for God or giving anything to God, I will tell you what it really is like. It is like a small child going to his father and saying, "Daddy, give me 6 pence to buy you a birthday present." Of course, the father does, and he is pleased with his child's present. It is all very nice and proper, but only an idiot would think that the father is 6 pence to the good in the transaction. When a man has made these two discoveries, God really can get to work. It is after this that real life begins. The man is awake now. We can now go on to talk of faith in the second sense, and that is the next chapter. But this is, by the way, where we get the term 6 pence none the richer. It comes from this passage. There's actually a band named after this too, 6 pence none the richer. And this very premise is this: when we come to realization that there is nothing we can do to earn our salvation. And so, since there's nothing we can do to earn our salvation, then what is it really? It is a gift of God that he gives us. And so I love this kind of story that he tells where this little child comes to this father and says, "Daddy, give me money so that I can give you a birthday present." And the father does it, but no real person, no person with any type of brain will look at what has just happened and go, well, obviously the father has gained something out of this. He hasn't. He's poor because he had to pay for it himself. But it is the relationship that is at play there that is different. Why does a child give a present to them? Because they love them, because they want to give to them. It is not because that they can give something to the father did not already have. And when we realize this situation in life, it should humble us. It should bring us truly down to our knees and realize the beauty of God and what he does for us. And when we submit to his will and we realize that he has everything mapped out for us, that we, for our good and for our joy and for our benefit, that there should be a peace that comes over our life. And instead of fighting against it, we can sit back and go, oh, I don't have to fight against this. Instead, I can truly just do my best to serve and love God to the best of my abilities. And he knows what those are. And that, like a child, I can serve God as my Father. So that is where we will wrap up for this evening. I just wanted to say thank you all for being here tonight. Big thanks to Ludke for being here tonight also. Grateful for all of you. So grateful for those of you who will tune in later. Looking forward to being back with you again next week. We continue on. We've got 3 other fantastic chapters. You can check the reading schedule online on our group. Please feel free to do that. If you're watching on YouTube, it's in the rabbit hole on Facebook. You can go and check that out. I love you all. So grateful. See you all next week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And if you've got a Sunday and you have an opportunity coming up to go and worship God, please go and do that. Find your local Church of Christ there. Go in and worship with them. If you've never been before, this is a great time to go in and ask some questions, talk with someone. I can't wait to see you all, whether in this life or the next. I love you all. We'll see you very soon.